Chapter 13. When they arrived at the castle, the party walked to the great hall, where a large table was set. The prince took a seat at the head of the table. The royal adviser sat to his left, Hannah at his right, her mother next to her, and Van next to their mother. Some of the other members of the royal court entered, followed by a select few of the prince's top knights, of whom Hannah recognized from the ball. The feast was brought out, and they ate and laughed in merriment. The prince continuously addressed Hannah and her mother, his charisma sucking the energy from Hannah. Forcing a smile, Hannah listened to the prince and the stories of his childhood, of growing up in royalty, of his biggest dreams. Hannah noticed the more he drank, the more personal and open the prince began to talk. The royal adviser, though mainly speaking with the other members of the royal court, paid close attention to what the prince said, hoping he could stop the prince before he revealed crucial information. However, Hannah hoped he'd be too late, for she wanted to know any information the prince possessed that she did not know of, though she most hoped he'd leak information about the court of kings. With the way the conversation had been going, Hannah started to believe she'd never hear what she wished. But then her mother, who only knew little about the matters Hannah wished to hear, interjected. "So, Prince, tell me, what do the duties of a king and queen involve?" Hannah sat up straight, listening attentively, the royal adviser also turning his head to hear the response. He glared at Hannah's mother, believing the question to be a part of some evil plan, though her mother appeared innocent. She simply wanted to add to the conversation, not extract information. Or, in the least, that was all her face expressed. "Well, Mrs. Baker," the prince began, his speech full of pride and honor, "both king and queen are responsible for all the townspeople of Wyvernon. From Wickborough to Grange, we are to make certain of economic stability and universal welfare of every citizen. As king, I will maintain current relations and mend any broken relations with other nations, particularly the 4 nations in the United Court of Kings, who are meant to be our greatest allies in times of strife." "Prince Daedalus," the royal adviser interrupted, "do you believe these matters are suitable for a dinner table?" Hannah focused on the adviser and noticed a fear in his eyes. The prince locked eyes with his adviser and confusedly resigned. "I suppose you're—" "But my king," Hannah interrupted, reaching out her hand to stroke the prince's arm. She could feel the royal adviser glare at her. The prince looked to her, his cheeks flushed, whether from the drink or the unexpected touch of affection she did not know. "These matters interest me as well. Do you remember our talk, the day when you chose me to be your queen?" "Yes," the prince smiled. "You're quite curious and intelligent, just the way the queen should be." "But, Prince," the royal adviser spoke up, the tone of his voice more alert and assertive, "we never know who could be listening in. You will also remember the sorcerer who snuck in without our knowledge?" "Are you suggesting someone here to be a spy?" the prince asked in a harsh tone. The royal adviser had to sit back in shock of the response from the prince. Hannah glanced at him while trying to hold back a smile. The sensation of a partial victory coursed through her. She then glanced at her mother, whose eyes stared at her plate, a look of contemplation on her face. The prince turned his back to his royal adviser and continued. "Where did we leave off in that conversation?" the prince asked, extending his hand on the table toward her. Hannah felt the butterflies stir up in her stomach. Her days at the bakery taught her much of people and their body language. Did the prince really care for her input? Hannah's hand moved to her hair, stroking it as she attempted to recall the conversation. "I believe I asked about the amendment concerning sorcerers," Hannah answered, her voice soft and timid so as to hope they would not linger on that particular subject. "Oh, yes, I remember," the prince joyously stated. "My royal adviser has informed me that the final touches are being made to it. Once we're married, I'll be able to vote on the issue and any further changes." Hannah's eyes widened, at first not believing she heard him correctly. The royal adviser's head fell into his hands, his irritation directed towards the prince tangible. "You mean you weren't involved in the writing of the amendment?" asked Hannah. Her face dropped, the act of attempting to manipulate him through flattery, and grew serious. "Well, until I become king, I cannot alter any amendments to the Constitution or vote on new ones. Only leaders of the kingdoms included in the United Court of Kings may vote or make alterations, and according to the laws of Wyvernon, I am not the true leader until I take up a queen, the prince replied in a matter-of-fact, proud tone. But Hannah managed to whisper before the royal advisor interrupted her. Prince Daedalus, the royal advisor started, the day has been long and eventful. Perhaps we should get the soon-to-be royal family into our guest quarters for the night, so they do not have to journey home in the dark. The royal advisor forced a sympathetic smile, praying the prince would accept his proposal for sake of his last remaining patience. Ah, yes, splendid idea. Fetch the ladies-in-waiting and have them attend to the family. Ensure their comfort is no less than exceptional, the prince instructed. The royal advisor gave a nod and an ensuring smile. The prince stood, his arms open. I thank you all for attending this feast, not only in triumph over the treacherous events from earlier in the day, but in celebration of our new queen. The table is now dismissed. Everyone rose from their seats and bowed in the prince's direction, the Baker family following suit. As Hannah did so, the prince stopped her. No need for you to bow to me, the prince whispered with a smile on his face. Hannah shared a nervous grin and looked down the table at all those bowing in their direction. Dismissed, the prince shouted, and the knights and members of the royal court headed to the door, ready to return to their duties. The prince grabbed Hannah's hand and brought it to his lips. Good night, my queen, he said, before kissing it, the warm, gentle brush of his lips against her skin sending the butterflies into flight. Good night, my king, she responded, her voice trembling. The prince widened his smile before heading off toward his bedchamber. The royal advisor waited until the prince was no longer in sight before talking. Hannah could feel his hostility toward them, though she could also tell he was trying with great difficulty to suppress it. I'll lead you all to your rooms before fetching the ladies-in-waiting to serve you, the royal advisor said, as if he was forced to say it. That is very kind of you, Hannah's mother responded, her tone serious despite the compliment. The royal advisor led the three from the great hall and toward a wide, carpeted staircase. As they walked the castle, Van's face expressed his awe, their mother holding his arm so he did not escape with his curious, adventuresome spirit. Hannah's mother was also quite impressed by the castle, not having been within the walls in many years, the last being when the late king invited her after the death of her father. But her mother appeared quite anxious, as if holding tightly onto a thought she didn't wish to escape. The royal advisor stopped in front of an oak door and thrust it open, revealing an extravagantly decorated large bedchamber. This room can be for the boy. Not trying to disrespect you or the prince, Hannah's mother began, the royal advisor rolling his eyes, but I'd prefer the three of us to stay within the same room for tonight. You see, we're not accustomed to this degree of decadence, and I would dislike for either of my children to feel overwhelmed. Van started to open his mouth in disagreement, but Hannah quickly squeezed his arm. He understood the signal and said nothing, but gave a pouty lip. Hannah's mother ended her concern with a sincere and motherly smile, years of practice at the bakery and home helping her in her ability to convince while still appearing innocent. I see, the royal advisor murmured, giving her a skeptical glare. However, if you could get your ladies-in-waiting to bring some extra cushions, I suppose we'll all be very comfortable for the night. Yes, I'll tell them. The royal advisor walked away, presumably toward the rooms of the ladies-in-waiting. Hannah and Van ran into the room, both of them inspecting every inch. Hannah's mother closed the door behind her and sat on a sofa near the fireplace. Hannah, noticing her mother's silence and lack of adventure in this new environment, walked over to her. Every step she took on the carpeted floor reminded her that she was only stepping closer to her future. The flash of excitement and awe she had over the room quickly faded, similar to how her interest faded for the prince. The room suddenly felt cold. Hannah approached the fireplace and placed a few logs within before lighting it. She sat on the brick nearby and stared at her mother, unaware of what to say. She couldn't bring herself to express how little she wanted to follow through with marrying the prince. The images of the royal advisor and the reaper only heightened the feeling of grief concerning a life lived within the castle. Ma, Hannah began, feeling herself beginning to shake despite the heat from the fire. "I am so sorry," her mother responded. Hannah looked into her eyes and noticed them glitter. Was her mother crying? Hannah stood and darted to be next to her mother, embracing her and feeling herself begin to cry. "Why are you sorry?" "Because I should want what's best for my daughter, and I can't do it." Hannah pulled away from the embrace and sent her eyes on a journey through the room, ensuring no one extra was listening. She stared into the fire, the flames reminding her of... She shook her head, attempting to return to reality, that her dreams were just that, dreams. "This castle, the prince, the royal advisor, it just doesn't feel right. Unsafe," her mother explained. The tears subsided, but her voice and expression remained solemn. Hannah's mother grabbed her daughter's hand and stroked it, perhaps trying to calm herself more than Hannah, who had become accustomed to hiding her true emotions. Hannah was numb to the feelings of desperation and hopelessness, loneliness, fear. She had accepted her future, one where she would not have the choices she'd want, but those that were otherwise only superficial. Her mother, though normally hiding under a guise of happiness, revealed her true feelings, the feelings she felt for her daughter. "Ma, don't worry about me. I may not have wanted this at first, but..." Hannah paused, a strange sensation coursing through her body, warmth and strength. No one was there to carry her. Hannah couldn't depend on Nina or her mother, or Seer, to support her or rescue her anymore. She thought of her father. He constantly faced different environments, new people and situations on his trading missions. He had to support himself, form his own foundation, and build upon it. Hannah admired his independence and strength. She had to be strong, even if the negative voices in her head told her she was weak. Feigning strength may be easier to feign than happiness, or at least Hannah hoped. "I have to be the one to marry him. Seer told me something horrible and it terrified me. But I wouldn't be able to live with myself if I let some other girl go through with this. I'd only blame myself if something happened." "What do you mean, honey?" her mother asked. "Someone with connections to this castle is probably responsible for the death of the late king. I don't know why. Maybe there was an argument, but they hired a reaper to kill him." "Do you think they'll do it again?" Hannah's mother questioned. After she spoke the last word, her eyes lit up. "You think they'll kill you after the marriage?" Hannah had thought those words ever since Seer told her about the reapers, thinking about how lowly she was held to those of the royal court. However, hearing her mother say those words felt surreal, as if she wanted those words to remain in her own head and no one else's. "Ma," Hannah began, but they were interrupted by a knock on the door. Van ran and opened it. His eyes grew big and he stared at whoever stood in front of him, slowly backing away from the door. "Who is it, Van?" their mother asked, staring confusedly at him. Van blushed. 3 ladies-in-waiting entered the room, carrying cushions and blankets as asked by their mother. Hannah's mother went to help them, instructing them where she would prefer the materials. Van continued to stare at them, his eyes quickly moving to the ground if one were to look at him. Hannah turned back to the fire, its warmth ensuring her that she was not entirely numb to the feeling. When she had first heard the knock on the door, her heart had dropped. She hoped she wouldn't be forever paranoid about a threat. She gazed into the flames, the sounds in the background fading away. The flames effortlessly danced on the logs, the ruby reds shining brilliantly. Hannah sighed. As she turned to see her family, her heart accelerated as if to escape. A dark form stood within the room. She held her breath, but then let it go when she realized what had happened. Van had wrapped himself in a black blanket, wearing it much like the cloak he had on earlier. The image of the reaper flashed before her at the sight, sending a terror through her. She looked away and placed her head in her hands, focusing on her breathing in an attempt to calm her heart. However, her thoughts raced in her mind. A memory, one that had become mixed amongst the other events of the day, surfaced. The reaper said he had been to the castle. He spoke with the royal advisor. He knew the royal advisor, and the royal advisor knew him. Hannah couldn't believe it, but the truth of it all seemed to fit. It made sense. The royal advisor was the one who wanted the late king dead.